Okay, we've been talking about what? Incoherence. Oh, I'm sorry, they called it decoherence. I call it incoherence. Quantum incoherence. What is that? Well, particle at two places at once. Now, how rational is that? Photon is simultaneously both an extended wave and a point corpuscle. It's known as duality, complementarity, both at the same time. It's that before you measure it. Then it collapses to one or the other. In fact, in the case of the photon, it always collapses to a particle. It never collapses to a wave because a wave is a verb. Can't collapse to a verb. It's got to collapse to a noun. Turns out the photon's not a noun either. Photon is what? A zero-dimensional whatever, and that's not much of a noun there. Okay? So yeah, that's incoherence for you. We covered that a couple weeks ago. Here's entanglement. What came after that? Here's entanglement. In a nutshell, entanglement, particle here affects particle there. Without physical mediator. There's no physical mediator. One is going counterclockwise, the other one clockwise, then they switch around, and the other one instantaneously turns in the other direction as well. And there's no physical mediator. How did it do it? Magic? Black magic? Is that what we're going to call it? Yeah, it's instantaneous action at a distance, and they could never explain, they never will. How do you explain it with particles, with discrete particles? How do you explain action at a distance? How is a particle affected by another particle if they're all separated by space? Well, that's easy. All you say is, well, you put more particles in between. They come out of space that turn into two particles. You know, space is made of two particles. Space is nothing. So we have black and white particle, and they get together and they form a no particle. And then the no particle divides into a black and white particle. That's great. Tell me the process. Tell me the mechanism, how it does it, how Mother Nature does that magic trick. If you can't explain that, you've got nothing. You just spent saliva. Okay, then we came up last time around with superposition. What's superposition? Well, the horse gallops and stands still at the same time. How does that happen? How can a horse run, even if in the same place? Okay, I'll concede that. Okay, here's the horse running in the same place and at the same time standing still like a statue. What sense does that make? How can you picture that? I mean, I tried to picture it, but I'm very creative. No, you cannot imagine a particle that vibrates and it doesn't vibrate at the same time. Makes no sense to say it's vibrating and not vibrating until you measure. As soon as you measure, it collapses to one or the other of these states, quantum states. So all these they're nonsense. That's what they are. And so here we have, where did it come from? All this from this gentleman, Niels Bohr, okay, principle of complementarity. And that's essentially the foundation of this thing that they shortened to duality. You know, light is both a particle and a wave at the same time. They don't say it like that. They say it behaves as if. Well, you're saying in different words that it is, because that's what you're simulating, what you're saying with. You're saying here's a particle, here's a wave, until I measure. Then it collapses to one or the other, and it always collapses to the particle. That's the duality. And what is this? What did good old Bohr say? Well, he said essentially it's an essential, this complementarity, it's an essential feature of quantum theory. Okay? And objects have pairs of complementary properties which cannot be observed or measured simultaneously. Specifically, they're talking about what? Position and momentum, energy, time. They have a couple of these dualities out there, okay? They like all this stuff because they say it gives them something to work on, it gives them job security. Okay? Measuring one quantity of a pair, for instance, the position of an electron, excludes the possibility of measuring the other, for example, momentum. Impossible to have a sharp separation between the behavior of a system and its interaction with the measuring instrument. That's what complementarity is all about. In other words, they have no clue. Or like Mr. Feinstein said in the 60s, he said, no one understands quantum mechanics. And what is he saying? He's saying if you don't understand it, you cannot explain it. It means you don't have a theory. So you're not a physicist, because a physicist is a scientist, and a scientist is someone who explains. If you cannot explain, in the case of physics, a mechanism, a cause, you are not a physicist. If you cannot explain how magnetism does its magic, if you cannot explain how a particle can be at two places at once, you can explain how time warps in general relativity, right? Then you haven't said anything, because we're interested in the hows and why, and the causes and mechanisms. That's what physics deals with, not with math, equations, descriptions. Okay, here we have Mr. Heisenberg. He put in the other grain that comprises what we know as the Copenhagen interpretation, a brainchild of Mr. Bohr. It says there is a limit to the accuracy with which the position x and momentum p of a particle can be predicted from initial conditions. And he came up with this, equation that says the more you know about one, the less you know about the other. Okay, so this is one of the foundations. All these are foundations of quantum mechanics. This is what these people believe. This is what the people spread out there. And this is how they explain. These are the physical interpretations that they're giving you. Okay, that's what we need to wrap our brains around. These are the physical interpretations. So here we say we try to measure here, and because you can measure here, you don't know what's going on over there. And Einstein said, no, we should be able to know what's going on over there, because if we can determine the position here, we should be able to, without measuring, we should be able to know what's going on over there. And, Bohr came back with an answer to that. But essentially, this is what Heisenberg proposed. He says, the more you know about one, the less you know about the other, position versus momentum. I like to call it as follows, because what is position? Location. What is momentum? It's motion. So we have location and motion. And so they say the more you know about location, the less you know about motion, and vice versa. No kidding. If the ball is standing still, it's not moving. And if it's moving, well, it's not standing still. And the funny thing is they had to come up with an equation to explain that. And so this is the way I like to put it. Here's good old Heisey. And it says when the ball stands still, it doesn't move. And when the ball moves, it doesn't stand still. Yeah, no kidding. Do we need an equation to understand this? So this is what Heisey proposed. And so, you have Einstein and his buddies, Podolsky and Rosen. They came up with this. Let me get back in here in a second here. And he came up with this paper, 1935, with his buddies Podolsky and Rosen, and they criticized the Copenhagen interpretations. What are you people saying? Are you saying that, we cannot measure exactly? And Einstein's argument was that even if we don't measure, hopefully what's occurring out there, Mother Nature is in control of that. She knows what's going on. Maybe we don't know. We don't know how to measure. We don't know how to take that measurement, in the microscopic world. But hopefully Mother Nature, Father Universe, the devil, one of those guys has to know what's going on in reality. Again, so they said quantum particles must have position and momentum even without being measured, and so quantum mechanics must be an incomplete theory. It's known as the incompleteness argument raised by Einstein and his buddies. The faraway particle must have precise values of both quantities, whether or not that particle is measured in any way. That's essentially his argument. What did Bohr say? Well, he came back with a stunning reply. He says, well, Heine, you're wrong. Measuring momentum does not allow the observer to automatically transfer or extrapolate, right, this to an inference of position of the other particle. So this is what he's saying, it just is. That's the way it is. And Einstein had a problem with that because he says, that doesn't make any sense. And Bohr just replied, well, we're not supposed to make sense. In other words, we're not supposed to understand the common sense of Mother Nature. That's essentially what his argument was. And so you have Schrodinger, and Schrodinger was a buddy of, Einstein and all these other folks. He said, this is what the Copenhagen interpretation is saying. What these people are saying is that, and he put it in classical terms, he put it in terms of macro items in the famous Schrodinger cat. And he says, look, a particle is merely a probability function. That's what he was saying, that this is what the Copenhagen folks were saying. Okay, Schrodinger's cat is an analogy for a particle. So we're going to use a real object, such as a cat, to explain, to illustrate what these people are saying in quantum, just in case you missed it. Okay, the particle is described by a wave function. It's described by a wave function. So they're talking about an equation. What is an equation? A verb, not a noun. The equation is a verb. It's a snapshot or coded way of presenting motion. That's what an equation is. Okay? So equation is always a verb. The wave function proposes that a quantum particle is spread out and occupies all of space. Okay, so here we have this wave function. It occupies all of space. It's like the cat occupies all of space. Schrodinger's cat. Okay, this distinguishes it from the classical corpuscle, because the classical particle looks like this. It looks like a ball. Okay, that's not what a quantum particle is. Quantum particle is an equation that when you touch it, when you try to measure, when you put your little measuring stick, meter stick towards it, it occupies the entire universe. It's spread out. They call it a field, value at each point in space. So it's condensed and at the same time spread out. They covered all the bases. They had to make sure that they could cover all the bases for their equations. Okay? And so Schrodinger put what happens to a micro subatomic particle in macro world terms. That's what he did. Okay? He said, look, This is what the Copenhagen guys are doing. I'm going to do it with my cat. The cat is both dead and alive until you open the box. In other words, until you see, you observe, you measure, you detect. Schrodinger wants you to understand how absurd the physical interpretations of quantum mechanics are. So it's not only, decoherence. It's not only entanglement, action at a distance without a mediator. Black magic, I call it. Okay, it's not superposition. Okay, folks, I got some big problem here, major problem. I'm going to have to cut it short today. So I will see you next time. I wasn't able. Well, let me finish here. You'll hear my voice in the background, but I got lost. I'm not here anymore. I'll just give you my conclusions of this. Okay, as a final thing, it's and this conclusion are all quantum physical interpretations, decoherence, entanglement, superposition, complementarity, and uncertainty are all irrational. Schrodinger devised an analogy in macro terms, okay, to ridicule Bohr's Copenhagen interpretation. And it's known as Schrodinger's cat. Analogy, you could call it. Okay. Despite the blatant attack on the Copenhagen interpretation unrationality, most mathematical physicists today, physicists with quotation there, subscribe to it. That's what people believe. This is what they explain out there. What does it say about the mental capacity of mathematical physicists to elucidate the workings of the universe? Should you believe in them? Should you put your hand in the fire for these people when they cannot tell you? They cannot tell you, and they cannot explain to you any of these phenomena because they can't see it. They cannot observe it. They talk about observing being part of the scientific method of physics, and here they cannot observe, but they still give you interpretation. So why do they give you physical interpretations if they cannot? If they cannot, first if they dismiss them as philosophy, and then if they cannot observe anyways. So this is the issue. The issue is that these people are selling you nonsense. And when you put them against the ropes and start battling them, saying, hey, by the way, what you're telling me is nonsense, they say, well, we know it's nonsense, but that's philosophy.